Well, thank you for joining us here to talk about your book, Love and Rage. I really, really liked your book,
Thank
um,
you.
which is saying a lot because I don't really read Dharma books
Oh
anymore.
my God, me too.
You know, they're boring. They
Yeah,
say they say the same thing. It's like
yeah,
life is suffering. Focus on your breath. Repeat.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
This is like a regurgitation of like, okay, here are the basic tenets,
mhm.
and it's like I used to complain all the time about like how many books do we need about basic goodness and like mindfulness.
What is that anyway? Yeah, but your book was not that, and it was very it was complex and it was funny and I had a lot of feelings about it.
Mhm,
And yeah, like it made me angry. It
mhm.
made me I had all sorts of feelings. So I think that was successful. Um, and so I wanted to. It's about anger,
Yes.
and what I thought you did really well was holding complexity and nuance about anger. And what I saw you laying out was these kind of polarities of, on the one hand, this universal experience of anger that is um, pointing to woundedness and pointing to heartbrokenness, and that kind of the Buddhist practice is about tending to that woundedness. And so anger can be a signal that that needs to be taken care of. So that's on kind of one end of the spectrum, and on the other end of the spectrum, you have the very like personal relationship to anger, which is that it's politicized and it's racialized, and that anger means something very different for people of color, especially because oftentimes it's a protest against violence and a protest against being killed. Um, so as I was reading it, I felt kind of protective of your anger.
Mhm,
I was like, no, don't get rid of it. Like
mhm.
it's serving a function. Um, so I'm wondering. My question is, what is your relationship with anger like now? And did writing the book change your relationship at all?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback. Um, yeah, I guess when I started the book, I would say first of all, I didn't really want to write a book about anger. Um, I, I just didn't feel it was interesting enough for me as a topic to explore. But what I also knew really strongly was that like people really needed something,
Mm-hmm.
to help with anger because of course, if you've read the book, and anyone who reads the book, that like I start the book out by talking about, okay, this is why anger is up for me because of this thing that happened in 2016, this election, and all of a sudden everyone was talking about anger,
Mm-hmm.
and bringing these questions, and I was just like, oh, anger's good, and that's all I could say, and so the book really came out of like a need for me to really just kind of lay this out, the complexity, you know. Um, I Anger was the first thing I really, really worked on, in my practice. Like it was the first thing that I really could start sinking my teeth into in terms of having an object, a focus in my practice, right? And so I've just kind of learned to do a bunch of things. I just do it naturally, you
Mm-hmm.
know. My anger was something that, yeah, I used to understand as being very dangerous, right? And so I just was really super passive aggressive. And my early practice was actually tuning back into that passive aggressiveness to start re-expressing that anger, within a container of practice. Not just like expressing anger just for the hell of it, to like, to understand it, but just to pour it into something, that could hold it. But now, like my relationship to anger, yeah, I mean, anger is so important for me. Now I understand
Mm-hmm.
what my anger is doing. I understand that, like, okay, I've been hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Take care of the hurt, and now if I take care of the hurt, I can go back to the anger. I can take care of the anger too, instead of just reacting to it and creating harm and violence, like I can actually use it in a way that's constructive and really like beneficial, you know.
Mm. Yeah, that's good. I'm happy to hear that. And I know you have the meditation for loving anger
Mhm.
in the book. It's interesting that you mentioned expressing anger, because where I've come down to in my anger journey is that, like, um, I want to get to a place where I can feel anger, I can acknowledge what's happening, but not express it. So, but I don't even know if that is where I want to go with it. Like, yeah, I think so though. That there's something about that, there's wisdom in the anger, but it's in the mindless expression of it that is when the harm happens.
Yeah, it was when we lose like agency
Yeah.
in the situation, and in tantric Buddhism we have like tantric anger and wrath, and those have been really important frameworks for me to really understand that, like, yes, like anger, at the heart of anger we can actually implant compassion,
Mhm.
but you have to do it in a way in which you have agency over the anger,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. And that was the part I think where I was feeling protective of, well, also my anger too, and of like thinking about how when people have been abused and victimized, so often the reaction is shame and to blame themselves. And so getting to a place of anger is actually like healthy, and it's showing that there's some like self-preservation that's happening.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, that is important. Like that's, yeah, and for me, that was part of my process, was actually getting to a point where I could just like touch the anger and just whatever happens, I could just touch it, and I knew that that wasn't where I was gonna stay,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But it's like it's getting to this place where I am in my anger and I'm dropping all these narratives about if this is right or wrong. Like I'm just in it, you know? But it's something that I'm holding at the same time,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know? And yeah, I do, like when I'm really in my anger, it's like, I cuss people out. I do all kinds of stupid shit, but like I know that I'm doing it. That's the
Mm-hmm.
thing now.
Yeah.
If I say something mean, I'm like, I know I'm saying this. I know I'm saying something super mean,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah. It's reminding me of the story that you told in the book of the woman on the bus with there was a group of people and they pushed past her and the doors were closing and she opened them and could see that she was really angry, but she managed to turn it into like something that was very fiercely
Yeah.
compassionate, but like she was pissed.
She was very pissed, and that whole scenario, the whole thing is seared in my brain forever because I was like, oh my god, like you could just lose it.
Yeah.
You have a right to lose it on these kids, but I could feel like that was like kind of at the beginning of my practice, maybe right before my practice, but I could like feel the work that she was doing to hold
Yeah.
that energy, but I felt like she really wanted to help these kids,
Yeah.
and I just learned so much. It was 2 minutes, a minute, like it was so short, but she taught me something really important I couldn't understand until much later.
Hmm.
You know?
Hmm. That's interesting. What shifted that you understood something different later?
Yeah, it was my meditation practice. I was like, oh, this is like what it means to like notice emotion and actually hold it in your experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because it feels like what she was doing. It felt like she was riding energy, but the energy wasn't riding her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then when I started practicing, I was like, oh, that's what was happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I had no idea who she was. I don't know if she was a practitioner. I don't know anything, but I know that there was some advanced shit that I saw.
Reminds me of the stories. It's the Zen stories of like the tea ladies who are like
Mm,
just kind of low key, like in a tea house serving
yeah,
tea, and then whip out the Zen wisdom. You also have a lot that's not about anger for a
Yeah.
book about anger. Um, there's so much good stuff in here. I don't even know where to, I mean, to go with it. There's a lot about ancestor worship, um,
Mhm.
which I've been thinking a lot. Ancestor worship is so hot right now.
I know.
Um, and I don't know why I finally like. It's funny because my practice, was mostly in the Japanese tradition and a lot of ancestor worship, right? And I always felt that it was very like shallow and performative. And I didn't
Yes.
realize until like last month is because it was the wrong ancestors. Like those aren't my ancestors. Like of course it's shallow and performative for me. So now I'm gradually inviting that into my practice. But yeah, do you have anything you want to say about that and what your practice is like with that now?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, I wasn't raised really, to even think about ancestors. I didn't start getting into ancestors maybe until I was, I mean, this has been the past 4 years, 5 years or so, not long. And I have a friend who studies within, another, African religion. Um, and she would just, I don't know what it was that she was doing, but she would just like, she'll call me up and she'll just be like, the ancestors want me to give you a message. I was like, okay. And she was always ancestors, ancestors, ancestors. And I think I just started naturally turning my mind more and more to
Uh-huh.
this idea of ancestors in my practice and bringing that into Buddhism, in a really strong way. And that emerged, that evolved into like really like learning how to connect directly to like the reality of this energetic presence of ancestors around me, and so
Mhm.
that my connection to the ancestors, have become such a really strong part of how I move through the world now. A communication, really a literal communication that I've been able to set up with my ancestors and learning a lot. I think sometimes we frame ancestry in a really negative way, but in a positive way, but it also has a shadow to it. All of our ancestors aren't interested in us being well and helping us. And sometimes you have to learn the hard way
Mhm.
about working with these energies, these beings, these spirits, this consciousness, right? And so yeah, like I think that in terms of anger and ancestry, I think that I understand that like there's energy being channeled through my ancestors into my experience, and
Mhm.
I wanted to have agency over that.
Mhm.
I talk about transhistorical trauma, which I've talked about. I talk about in Radical Dharma. I talk about here in Love and Rage. But there's also transhistorical rage that comes with that, and you have to do work around that because I can do all I can to have agency over my anger, but I'm still absorbing like this energy in
Mhm.
other ways. And
Mhm.
part of our practice has to be about getting really sensitive about energy and
Mhm.
disrupting, how energy is being transferred into our experience.
Mhm. I really appreciate you writing about that. I can't remember if it was in the brokenheartedness chapter. Oh, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's the trauma chapter where you talk about intergenerational trauma and yeah, in
Yeah.
particular, yeah, like Black Rage. And I appreciate you writing that because I've been noticing that for myself too in my own way that my experience of grief is often it's just like an ocean. It's like this
Yes.
huge ocean that feels way bigger than me, and the only way that I can conceptualize it to make it have it make sense is that it's like 3,000 years of shit,
Yeah.
trauma of some kind. um,
Yes.
but it's hard to know what to do with something that's that big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had to, it's, I've had to do some really intense work, particularly using plant medicine, and I actually have a chapter in this anthology coming out in February, and it's an anthology of Black Dharma teachers. And my chapter is about plant medicine and ancestry work, you know. which is so edgy. It's like completely out there, but like people are really thrilled to have
Not in San
it.
Francisco, it's not.
Yeah, in San Francisco, right? That's right. That's like, oh, is that it? That's all you're doing. Yeah, it's now on the East Coast now. But yeah, like I like using plant medicine, ayahuasca in particular. I do several plant medicines, but ayahuasca I've used initially to really get into this kind of stream of energy with the ancestors, and it's been brutal. And it's been nothing but practice. My practice, my Dharma practice, actually helped me to like disrupt, this kind of like way in which this transhistorical trauma and rage is like rolling towards. It's like as you said, it's like this like ocean, and like that's how I experience it. I talk about this, in some other writing, but not in that chapter. But I talk about when I'm working sometimes with ancestors, with my family, in the bardo or the spirit realm. It's like touching into an ocean of sorrow, and I like, my initial thing is like, okay, how do I like evaporate this ocean, but really the practice is how do I begin to love the sorrow, and let it be there, and then I can have agency over it. Like I can set boundaries now around how much I take on of the sorrow, because you can drown in it.
Yeah, for sure. How do you? That's interesting. I guess I have two questions coming out of that. One is, how do you for yourself distinguish between like an overwhelming feeling that is yours and one that is perhaps transgenerational? And yeah, how do you have boundaries with that?
A while ago, I used to sit with this astrologer, who was incredibly helpful for me. I was going through a really difficult period. And he was the first person, interestingly enough, who was like, you're having all these experiences, but they're not yours. I was like, what do you mean? What on earth do you mean? He was like, we're all connected. We're all sensitive in different ways. You're sensitive in a particular way, and you're just like absorbing other people's experiences. And so one of the reasons you're struggling is that like you're confusing all this is your stuff, where in fact you have to learn how to set boundaries and to understand what's other people's stuff or your ancestors' stuff or what's your stuff. And he was really talking specifically about the male ancestry in my family. He was like, you're trying to be you're trying to be connected to something. Your male ancestors want you to get connected to something that you shouldn't be connected to, that you actually should disrupt. And he was like, there's a transference happening from your father to you, and you're beginning to take that transference on. And I was like, all that stuff was like, oh my God, you're right. I wanted to write a book about that, like that. That's going to be a book in the future. But yeah, so I began to really experiment after that and really get into it. And I began to understand that, like, oh, my stuff has an origin in my mind. Like when I have a thought, I can trace that thought. If it's mine, I can trace it back to an origin. But there are thoughts or emotions that pop up in my mind. I'm like, oh, where does this come from? If I can't find the origin, then chances are it's something that I'm picking up and tuning into from other beings. Yeah.
That's a useful distinction.
Yeah.
Because you're right. Sometimes there's a very clear narrative or trigger.
Yeah. And a lot of people are like struggling like that right now. They're just like absorbing everything. They're like antennas, but like, no, it's like, you have to learn how to discern what's yours and what's other people. When it's other people's, then like, I just hold space for it. I'm like, okay, there you are. I'm like super empathic as well, and that was also helpful to understand about myself, that like I can walk into spaces and just absorb,
oh my God, me too.
Emotional energy. Yeah. And I've learned how to be like, no, I can hold space for it, but I can't take it on.
That's important as a teacher, especially. And I want to get to your part about being a teacher. But first, what's your sign?
My sign Virgo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just you mentioned astrology, so I had to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, so yeah, your part about brokenheartedness, you wrote, I was really touched by this. You said, and who will see me and love me for who I am, not for who I seem to be in public or on social media. So many people love the Lama, but who really loves Rod? Who would be attracted to Rod without the Lama?
Yeah.
Who will see me as a sometimes flailing person trying to overcome their violence to themselves and others? Who will let me be human? And who will let me be human while realizing that it is within my relationship to my own humanity that I can best show you how to be free? And I related to that a lot. Like that is precisely why I don't teach Buddhism anymore. Is that right there that I
Yeah.
couldn't figure out a way to do it and actually be wounded and broken. And I love that you point out that like it's precisely that brokenness that is the actual lesson, maybe.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
it's really hard, and there's because of all those projections that you're talking about. Yeah, how's that going?
Well, I like that's how I would say always been since I was authorized as a teacher.
Mhm.
Like that's the path like I've struggled to embody, and definitely since radical dharma, you know, that's really been like the statement I've made. Like that was my introduction to the dharma world, in many ways, and that statement was yes, I'm like a mess, you know, and I have these opinions. I'm a contradiction sometimes, and this is how it's going to be. Like you won't get a product. You won't get like a finished product. And then, for me, yeah, of course, I've had to really push up against the ways in which communities really force us to be certain ways, you know. And I look specifically, and I know both of us have experience with this. I look at other teachers who buy in to that pressure. They fall right into that pressure and start performing for communities. And then it becomes a huge separation between who they really are, opposed to like this persona that they're giving people. And that's the loss of integrity. And that's also the beginning of like ethical misconduct.
Yeah.
And so I have to like this book, like Love and Rage is like, it's an expression of that messiness for me. Like I didn't want to give people a finished product.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I wanted there to be contradictions. I wanted there to be things that didn't make sense. I specifically wanted there to be contradictions between radical dharma and this book.
Interesting.
I wanted people to see that I have changed my opinion about certain things, and I wasn't interested in apologizing for it, but it's just saying that like this is what we do. This is what humans do.
Evolve.
Evolve and change and get confused, and just say, you know what, this is the best that I can do.
Mm-hmm.
And people, for me, like people know enough about me to know that like this is what they're gonna get. And so you can opt in or opt out at this point, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um and I'm happy about that. I'm happy to be able to show up and just to be myself. And yes, there are consequences. Absolutely. Like, yes, I get like, blocked from certain spaces. I don't get certain invites, I don't get included in certain things. But to have a sense of integrity and to be able to show up and just be myself, I mean, that's like everything for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel a lot of sadness for teachers who can't do that. I actually like coach young teachers who are coming up,
Mm-hmm.
really trying to get them to like really embody this practice of being themselves. And they're really fighting against the pressure of the communities that they're teaching in. And I get it,
Yeah.
I really get it, but we need authenticity right now. We always need it, but we need it now especially.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think about, I don't want to like call, any tradition out, but there are traditions. They're like cookie cutter kind of like production of teachers. It's like you have to be this way in order for us to recognize you as a teacher. And I have friends our age, young teachers who are like fighting against that, And I tell people it's like, you need to make a choice. Either you fall in line with what the tradition is giving you and then enjoy the resources that you get from being validated, or you choose to be yourself and then hit this path of having to create the resources on your own.
Yeah. And also I think about when I was reading your book, and as you're talking now, there's a sense of like metabolizing,
Yes.
like having metabolized, trusting that you've metabolized the tradition enough that you can then, I don't know, poop it out. What would be the continuation metaphor?
I think that's fair to say.
um,
But that lineage, it's nuanced. It's so nuanced, because I struggle with my lineage, right? But I love my lineage, and that's the energy of the book. I am pissed off, but I am loving at the same time, and I have to sit within that discomfort and that complexity, But like with lineage, it's like, it's so hard to talk about sometimes, how much of a struggle it is, but also for me, how necessary it is at the same time, And I think that's part of what it means that people are part of the lineage. It's like a complexity. That complexity is forcing us to mature in our practice. It's helping us to grow up. It's helping us to connect to what's beneath all the surface stuff. Like what's beneath the complexity. And for me, there's always the love, there's always the holding, there's always the reality that there's this profound thing happening within this relative experience, and we're somehow trying to bring the relative and the ultimate together. And we can only do so much, and there's no such thing as perfect either. And I think that's the romanticizing of practice is, this perfection, like with, practice can be perfect and we can just like sit and do our practice, and it can, if we do it long enough, it's going to be perfect, and we're going to be perfect teachers, and we're going to have a perfect death. And there's no such thing as any of that.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to talk to you about the Me Too chapter, since you also spoke about teachers and authenticity and the pressure to perform something and how that separates us from the Dharma, the precepts, authenticity. I'm trying to find the quote. Oh yeah. So you're talking about seeing your teacher right before he died, and you said, I had to let and so the chapter opens with your friend had come to you saying that she was sexually assaulted, and you're grappling with this, and then you see your teacher, he's dying, and you said, I had to let myself mourn my loss of belief in perfection. I let myself question enlightenment. He was teaching me that I was just like him, imperfect and complex. This realization did not excuse any harm that he had ever done. Our complexity never excuses harm. And though we are all complex, when that complexity creates harm, it is also calling for accountability. The point of the teaching is to live in the middle, where both extremes intersect. This is where I try to live, and this is where I take my relationship with my teacher. At one extreme, he changed my life, and at the other extreme, he harmed other people. Both are true, and they are much more true together. Rinpoche saved my life while he ruined other lives. So there you are, uniting the relative and the absolute, and you seem to have a lot of equanimity with that. But while I was reading that chapter, I felt really sad, and I wondered if like your friend was ever able to reach that same equanimity. Seems kind of like a hard task to ask.
Well, I'm in relationship with two of my teachers, survivors, victims, and I have regular conversations with the last student who survived a relationship with him. And this is exactly what we've been talking about, you know, and I don't want to like speak so much about her, but like, I would just say that her practice too has been about coming into that equanimity, you know, with a lot of work, absolutely, with therapy, with all kinds of support, you know, but like the way in which it's like moving into that middle ground, you know, I don't know if it's, you know, equanimity, you know, maybe it is equanimity that I would use, but like, there's still, it's still precarious. Like, it's still like, okay, I'm not quite set, you know, in the middle, I can still teeter to the other side of like, okay, yeah, my teacher was really, a villain. You know, it easily goes into that direction, right? You know, and what balances it out again is like, okay, you know, yes, he can be a villain, but like, my life was saved. Like, he once literally saved my life physically, you know, and I have no doubt that it was him that was part of saving me in that moment that I felt like I was going to die, you know, and it's like, and then it's like, okay, I still haven't gotten anywhere. You know, I'm just teetering back and forth, but I think that's just the practice. That's just how it is, you know, and no matter what, like, what I'm happy with is that, like, yes, I can still see the wrong.
You could still see the what?
The wrong, the harm, you know? And what scares me is when people don't.
Yeah, or even like I keep hearing this narrative that like we need to protect the dharma and protect the sangha, the implication being like by not, you know, tearing everything down. My impulse is to tear everything down, and then I have older people than me being like, well, you know, maybe we can, you know, we can just and but from my perspective, you know, it's no longer the dharma, like you said, you know, it's no longer a teaching if it's creating this much harm. It's no longer the dharma if it's doing this.
And I think that's also like, I get those arguments. I think that's a misunderstanding. It's like, I don't believe that the Sangha should always just exist because it's the Sangha. You know, I think the most skillful thing is for a Sangha to split, to shut down, to fall apart. You know, to actually allow real, like, whatever compassion, love to emerge within the community. You know, I hate when people are like, well, Sangha above everything. I just, so that's a cult. You know, like, that's a cult, you know, and it was my experience living in a monastery was a cult experience, you know, and that's also been very recent, you know, that I've kind of like you know, understood that, but like, and I understand it now as a cult, you know, because when I was in it, I was like, yeah, Sangha first, nothing could ever go wrong, you know, like, I can't ever leave the group, like all the stuff that is associated, you know, with cult membership. And then when you leave it, you're like, oh my God, I'm like one of those like Scientology, you know, members who like get out of the community, and you're like now on like a crusade to bring like the whole denomination down. Sometimes I feel like that.
Yeah, except that you somehow managed to like isolate the like good part. It seems as if through some work you have retained the part that was life-saving.
Well, that's, you know, I was like, when all that started happening with my monastery, the disclosure, there were people who were like, I'm never practicing Dharma again. You know, I'm like, I had friends who were like packing up all the Dharma stuff, you know, and I had friends who were burning their Dharma books. I mean, it was really, really, really extreme. And like, they would, you know, reach out to me. I was like, okay, I don't know what to do, you know, because obviously you have a right to do this. And I know that you're in the state right now that I've moved through, you know, and the only thing I can do is hold space for you.
Mm-hmm.
you know. But again, it's like I always the goodness, the good things always pulled me back. It was like, yeah, this is so horrible, this is evil, blah blah blah. And then there will be a voice that said, "But Rod, listen, you wouldn't be alive without this. You know, like you literally wouldn't be alive. The Dharma saved your life. You know, there are moments when you knew you were gonna die. You know, and you knew your teacher showed up in that moment to help you. Like you know all of this, and so you have to hold the space for everything, the heartbreak
Mm-hmm.
of all of this. You know, and I just saw it as the teaching itself. You know, my teacher. For me, in tantric traditions, it's like the real teacher is, well, the relationship of student to teacher is that the teacher is reflecting your wisdom back to you. Like the tantric teacher is a mirror.
It's like therapy.
Yeah, like therapy, absolutely. And I realized that, like, oh my God, this is just a mirror, reflecting some really heavy shit back to me,
Hmm.
and I can bypass it and lose this opportunity or just like deal with it, you know. And it was messy. It was like super messy. But it helped me to touch into this kind of sanity, and realism that I'd never experienced before. It was like the honeymoon period was finally over. And I was practicing not to feel good. I was practicing not to be a part of something that seemed like esoteric and mystical and interesting. I was practicing something that was just like really basic, and I was okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, you talked about the Lama and Rod and like who's gonna fall in love with me and all this, and I've had to deal with that. And I've had to deal and take responsibility for the ways in which people don't see me, because of a title, because of whatever it may be. And I've had to really work hard to establish relationships with people who are actually in relationship with me,
Mm-hmm.
And these relationships are my oldest relationships also. These are the people that like knew me
Mm-hmm.
before this, right? That I've actually had to take refuge in again. You know, all that's really important. I don't like hanging out with Buddhists, actually. you know, First of all you do is talk about work, and secondly, it's just like I can't like I can't be myself sometimes.
Hmm. What would you do that yeah, what would you like to do that you can't do?
Um, well, I have like friends who aren't in Dharma, because I just like one, I just like I have other interests besides Dharma, right? you know, like I love talking about all kinds of random shit, like I love fashion, right? I love like random pop culture things, in terms of like sexuality and sexual practice, I'm like non-monogamous,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and like I want to be in like friend groups that can hold that part of me, and reflect that back to me, in a way that is not tinted with a kind of like Buddhist morality, And that, when I say Buddhist morality, I mean like the judgmental,
Like the Puritan reality.
the Puritan stuff, right? I don't mean like what's right and what's wrong, but I'm meaning like just a judgment period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This kind of embracing and validating only of like monasticism,
Mm-hmm.
and abstinence and renunciation. Like I'm not that.
Yeah.
You
It's
know,
like the cookie cutter thing that you're talking about. That like
exactly.
being a Buddhist looks this way, being a teacher looks this way,
Yeah,
sexuality looks this way.
yeah. And there's so many teachers that are like so complex, but they refuse to reveal that complexity. There's so many more queer teachers than we realize, but they like perform this kind of heteronormativity. You
I
know,
mean, heteronormative. Yeah. That's
and I'm like, of course, on my end, I'm like, why don't you just like come out? You know, um, but we know the consequences of that.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah. It That's interesting. I haven't encountered teachers who are that it's interesting that you used that word heteronormative uh, to describe Buddhist teachers. I wonder, I'm just thinking of how it overlaps with like the Puritan kind of just traditional, like this is the way that things are. That's what I think of when I think of heteronormativity too. It's like, this is how things work.
Yeah, this is how you're going to be seen. You have to fall into the light just right. You know, and here are your boundaries right here. So take it nice and straight and narrow. You know, and I get that, but like it's just, you know, people weren't into taking risks. You know, people aren't, you know, willing to really like compromise the things that they think they need in order to be teacher, you know? And I just can't buy into it anymore. You know, I mean, this is another place that Love and Rage comes from. It's like, yeah, I was like, I don't want to write a Dharma book, but I've written a Dharma book, you know, but I want to write a book. Like I told my publishers, you know, I was just like, my publisher, I was like, you know, like I want to create a different kind of Dharma book that doesn't read as a Dharma book.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I want to like get really innovative in the way that like I set this up and talk about things. I want to create new language for all of this, you know, and it's hard, and I can't do that if I don't honor my complexity, my intersectionality, right? If I don't have friends who aren't in Dharma, but who can still reflect something really important back to me about who I am.
Yeah.
You know, and I have friends who don't. They're like Buddhism, whatever, right? And that's so important for me. You know, they respect what I do. They know what I do, and they're like, and this is just one part of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think because of if you think of Buddhism as a container, I think one container is not going to hold all of the complexity of a complex person. At least that's been my experience. It can hold a whole lot, but there's always going to be something that doesn't really fit in, or it needs expression somewhere else, needs mirroring somewhere else.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, maybe like one more question.
Sure, as much as you want.
Well, I'm thinking of a lot of things. You write about self-care. Yeah, I think I'm a late comer to self-care. I think Buddhism, my experience of Buddhism is it doesn't lend itself very well to self-care because of our notion of the self and this false belief that we should like transcend the ego. So it still feels to me very luxurious, and I'm grateful for the writers who have pointed out that, you know, poetry is not a luxury, etc. Yeah, why do you think it's so hard for us to do, and recognizing that all of the us's are different? But
yeah, and I love that statement, art is not a luxury.
That's not me.
Yeah, but like that whole sentiment, but like that whole idea, like that art is not a luxury, you know, and it go and in the same way you connected that to self-care. Self-care is not this luxury; it can be, right? And for me, it's like I've had to differentiate between self-indulgence and self-care, right? You know, of course, I'm deeply influenced by Audre Lorde, you know, and when she was you know, working through like cancer and cancer treatments that she eventually passed from, you know, she wrote the cancer journals. And that's where like this idea, her quote around self-care is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. You know, and self-preservation is an act of political warfare. And that really got my shit together. It really did, you know, because I was like, no, self-care for me, it's about retreating from the work, taking a step back from the work or whatever's happening to restore myself, because ultimately I want to return back to the work, and I want to return back to the work of collective liberation,
Yeah.
But as I step back, I have to ask myself, what is it that takes care of me? What is it that is restorative for me? Now, self-care and self-indulgence may look exactly alike, but I think the intention is very different. Self-indulgence is really about, you're not really interested in returning back to the work, the collective, right? You're just like, you're lost in your own pleasure. You're lost in like this bubble that you've created
Yeah.
that creates separation, isolation.
Yeah. I like that distinction that it's about being able to return back.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of this, like, since the pandemic happened, there's these mutual aid networks that have sprung up,
Yeah.
and I am loosely part of one, and I had signed up to deliver groceries to a disabled woman nearby, and I did once, and then she texted me at some point and was like, I don't have my medication, I need it today. And I went through this whole thing of like, like feeling like I'm like, she's asking for help, and like, but then there's another part of me that's just like, no, like I cannot drop everything in my life right now to get you your medication. That, yeah, I just can't. And I felt really bad, but eventually I said that I couldn't. I could do it tomorrow. But I think that was a moment for me. I was proud of myself for that, because that I needed to say no then so I could say yes later. And I did. I said yes later. So yeah.
Yeah, and self-care doesn't mean that like I say yes to everything,
Hmm.
or like trying to help. Well, I'll rephrase that. Self-care doesn't mean that like I have to like always say no and just say, I'm taking care of myself.
Hmm.
It's really about this recognition of boundaries.
Hmm.
It's like, okay, if someone comes to me, and they often do, like all the day, all day is like get emails and messages about what people need. And then it's like, okay, I'm hearing what other people need, but what do I need at the same time? And can I get my needs met while meeting other people's needs? Because if I don't get my needs met, then I'm actually not going to be that effective
Right.
for people needing help. And that's really where I come from. I have days where like I'm off of social media. I'm like, I put my phone somewhere where I can't see it, and like I just like shut down,
Hmm.
and I have to.
Hmm.
And that's not self-indulgent. It's like, I won't be able to help you if I don't take this space, right? And
Hmm.
it's still a struggle. This whole like thing about being a bodhisattva is like, oh, a bodhisattva doesn't rest. I'm gonna have to write a book about that too. I just need to like write a book about how like all that's kind of like this really intense mind training that makes it really hard, or that makes it hard for us to actually understand that like there's wisdom in resting.
There's a
You
what?
there's wisdom in resting.
Yeah.
And not like a bodhisattva is about understanding. Being a bodhisattva is about understanding the long game. Like not just this one moment. And we're preparing to help beings over a very long period of time. And like I just, I can't like push myself in the first 5 minutes
Yeah.
of this path and then completely burn out.
It's a marathon. That's right.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a very long marathon.
Especially
And
if we're going to be doing it for all of time.
exactly, and that seems overwhelming, but it's not so overwhelming because time is conceptual. It's like, how long is forever? I don't know. Who knows? Um, but yeah, like, so that was for me, like, this was like kind of like in Love and Rage, it was kind of like a small step forward, getting into something that I want to explore actually a little deeper in other, in other books in the future. But yeah, like all of these things are just like putting the book together. It was like, I just didn't want to have this linear thing. I think what we learned writing Radical Dharma was that, which I didn't get when we were writing, is that like there's something about disrupting. Like this kind of linear thing that people are really used to, you know? So for me, writing Love and Rage was like, okay, like you think this is about anger and rage, but it's actually about woundedness. It's taking care of your woundedness.
And love.
And love, you know? And I was like, I can't write a book just about anger. I don't have the energy for that. You know? I want to talk about the hurt beneath the anger as well. So, and to let people see that I am someone in process as well. You know, and that people aren't supposed to feel good necessarily reading this. You're not supposed to agree with everything, but you're like, I want people to see what I'm trying to do in my own practice to inspire you. I'm not trying to like perform Dharma for you to give you a finished product, which is what a lot of Dharma books are doing.
Well, then, yeah, and there's pressure to do that, as you were talking about. There's pressure from communities, there's pressure from publishers. Yeah. That's what I actually had like a meltdown after reading the first 2 chapters of I was so triggered. Because it reminded me of, because the first 2 chapters are about woundedness, like how anger is covering woundedness. And I had this whole like projection that it just reminded me of being in Buddhist communities and being told over and over again that I was too angry. Anytime like any abuse or oppression would happen, I would get angry and then I'd be told, I'm too angry. It's about me. And then I had this whole meltdown. And then the next chapter is you talking about tone policing. And you just like move past that. I was like, okay, whew, like there's more than just this one narrative about anger. So I appreciated that.
It's the complexity. You know, that's what people are, you know, we struggle with complexity. If you're not interested in complexity, this is not the book for you. You know, and again, it's not, you know, it's not a book that you can just kind of sit down and just say, you know what, I'm just gonna like take something out of it and use it, you know. But it's more like it's gonna like the book will start feeding into you, you know. This is why one of the quotes that I opened up with is James Baldwin when he was speaking with Nikki Giovanni. And this conversations on YouTube is amazing. Like I think they did in the 60s or early 70s where, you know, James Baldwin goes like, you know what, you know, if something I wrote hurt you, you have to understand that it hurt me first. You know, and I just like, that was like one of the guiding teachings for me and actually doing the actual writing. It's like, yeah, this hurts, you know, and I want people to understand that if it hurts them, then like, I want you to know that like it comes from my hurt. You know? Like, so there's like a commitment. Like I'm not just giving you something that's gonna hurt you. I'm giving you something that hurt me as well. So I want people to trust that. You know, like I know that it hurts. You know. Yeah.
Yeah. I got. No, I got that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I did think that the 7 homecomings are a nice little, like if you could make a little, you could like tie them with a bow and like send them off as like a digestible, very useful thing in themselves. And I remember on the retreat that I sat with you at Spirit Rock, you did teach those, and I love those.
And it's changed. You know, so like that's also the other reality. I've changed a lot since this book, you know, and that's how things go, you know. But this book was where I was at last year.
That's the thing about writing is I think about that. It's like my first book I wrote when I was, I don't know, 28.
Yeah.
Like it's so funny. People would say like never publish a book in your 20s, and of course I listen. But now I'm like, well, now this is a glorious monument to, you know, a 28-year-old's brain.
It's true.
Yeah.
You have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
That's how Reverend Angel and Being Black. You know, it's like she was in Buddhism 2 or 3 years, and she was writing a book. you know.
She was what?
Um, she
In
was, she was practicing, what, 3 years, I think, and she was writing a book.
Mhm.
She's talked about that with me before. It's like, okay, and there are consequences to that, um, and you do it and you keep moving.
Yeah.
That's the thing about being a writer. It's like you have to, if you're going to be a writer, you have to take responsibility for the writing. Like this is my gift to the world, and everyone's going to take it differently.
Hmm.
You know? But this is a record of where I was in a particular time in my practice in life.
Yeah.
And so now I'm in a different place.
Yeah.
You know.
You have like a page where you write about white women and disappointment, and I wonder if there's a book there by me about
Right.
white women and disappointment, which is so often the word that I hear um, again and again. It's just disappointment.
That was the conversation right after the elections that people were having too, just in my circles. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there was a lot of material coming out, just talking about white women and their place within like systematic racism, a lot of things that really need to be said.
Yeah,
Um,
it's such a tricky and like powerful, like very powerful position that in the race class matrix. That yeah, and I can see in myself too. It's like this dual allegiance, right? There's
yeah.
like investment in white supremacy and an investment in justice, and it's this like it's unconscious and it's this push and pull. It's very hard to break out of investment in white because it's about safety. And people are like, oh, safety, whatever, but safety is everything. Um, yeah. So much more to say and write about that, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about your book or?
Um, yeah, I just think that, for me, this book is the book for right now, I would say. As I was writing the book, I was just like, it didn't feel like I was writing a book for the moment that I was writing it. It always felt like I was looking to the future somehow. And I think that's why it was so hard to write. It's actually, this book is, I wrote actually 2 books, and so my editor had to like cut it in half,
Mm,
and help me construct what we know as Love and Rage. So I was writing a lot. I put a lot of material together,
mhm.
but I think this is the pandemic book.
Yeah, you have a chapter about the apocalypse.
Yeah, again, like I was like, I've been teaching about the apocalypse for 2 years now,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, why, I was like, something's gonna happen. Something's like, it was just, I just felt it, and I just started talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
and people were like, why, whatever. And then this happens, and the pandemic happens. You're like, oh, okay. And again, even with the work around the apocalypse, like I could definitely see something completely different about like what I wrote, but that was where I was, when I was writing it. So this is what we're living through, and I think that like this is important for us. This book is important for folks who will be entering into the second wave of this pandemic, which is going to be a mental health, wave. There's going to be a lot of grief.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when the summer really, really gets here, and like people are going to be carrying this weight around. I keep hearing people say, "Oh, when the summer gets here and the weather's great and we're going to be out and like blah blah blah," and I'm like, it's not going to be that simple.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
it's still in the midst of pandemic. Even if like we can do a few more things than we've been doing the past couple months. So yeah, it's a lot of mourning that we're gonna have to engage in. Again, like all that's in the book, and I was like, okay, you know,
mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a beautiful book, and like I said, I don't say that lightly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I appreciate it. I appreciate your emotional labor today and every other day. um,
Well, that's
yeah.
what we do.
Mm,
You know, you
yeah.
do this labor for the world. That's the Bodhisattva work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm crying with the world and for the world.
Yeah. Okay. I could talk to you for like 2 hours
I
more, but
know.
let's go to the bathroom. Let's maybe final question. What are you
Yeah.
hopeful for?
Yeah.
What do
I
you
get that a lot, actually. Um, I never know how to answer it. In this moment, what am I hopeful for? I feel excited. And I guess that excitement is coming from this potentiality for something really new and interesting and liberating to happen for many folks who are like asking themselves these questions now for the
Mhm.
first time. I'm excited. I'm hopeful for what that will lead to in terms of creating new ways of being together,
Mhm.
and loving one another. Um, you know, I'm hopeful that we that those of us who can do the work will start stepping up more and more
Mhm.
to be seen and to be heard and to offer whatever we can offer to help people.
Mhm.
You know. And I'm also hopeful that we have the capacity to really do collective emotional labor, you know, on a wider scale. So I'm hopeful for all of that. Um, yeah.
I feel like there's like a but.
But the but is that like there are a lot of people who will not be doing the work at the same time, and so there's just going to be there's just going to be like this kind of like divide.
Yeah.
That's how also I understand the apocalypse is too. Like there are going to be people who are just like fuck it, but there are
Mhm.
going to be people who are like okay, let's do it. And that is like that's the ambiguity. Like what's going to happen in that space that opens up between these
Yeah.
exchange of people. I
Mhm.
think we're already seeing it, but I think there's going to be really interesting things happening,
Mhm.
as we get disconnected from one another based upon how we're choosing to be in relationship
Mhm.
at this moment.
All right. Well, thank you,
Thank
and
you.
yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, I appreciate
Um,
it.